She didn't remember where she came from. He didn't ask. On a rainy night in a forgotten town, a woman with no name collapsed on the side of a road, and a single father with nothing to give but kindness chose to stop. What he didn't know was that his small act of compassion would ignite a chain of quiet miracles, ones that would heal her past, reshape his future, and transform an entire community. This isn't a story about fame or fortune. It's a story about second chances, about rebuilding not just a life, but a heart. So lean in, because what you're about to hear might just remind you that the gentlest kindness can carry the greatest power. A single dad found a missing woman while delivering groceries. What he did next changed her life. The rain didn't fall, it hammered, dense, relentless cold. Jack Whitaker adjusted the windshield wipers to their fastest setting, but they could barely keep up. Visibility was a joke now. The winding road ahead blurred into a stream of silver as his delivery van creaked around a sharp bend on the edge of town. The old mountain road always felt abandoned after dark, but tonight it felt forgotten. In the passenger seat, a brown paper bag rattled slightly a last-minute grocery order from a retired widow who lived alone. Jack didn't mind. At 36, he'd learned to appreciate the simplicity of a warm meal and a thank you. It beat the chaos he'd left behind in emergency response work years ago. A low cough from the back seat snapped him out of his thoughts. Ben, his 9-year-old son, was curled under a flannel blanket with his sketch pad. The little guy insisted on coming along tonight, some silly reason about needing dad-son adventure time. Jack smiled to himself. He couldn't say no to that face even when it meant navigating storms in the dark. They rounded a corner. That's when Jack saw her. A figure on the shoulder of the road. No umbrella, no coat, just a thin blouse clinging to her frame soaked through. She was standing with her back to the road, arms wrapped around herself, head down. Her hair hung in dripping strands and she looked like she might collapse. Jack slammed the brakes. The van fishtailed slightly before coming to a stop. Ben sat up alarmed. "Dad, what's wrong?" Jack was already unbuckling. "Stay here, buddy. Lock the doors." He threw on his raincoat and jogged into the storm. As he approached the woman, he slowed down, careful not to startle her. "Ma'am," he called out gently. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just stood there trembling. When he came closer, he could see her face young, early 30s maybe. Pale lips, eyes wide, unfocused. "Hey," he said again, voice low and steady. "You're freezing." She looked up at him then, and for a heartbeat, Jack forgot everything. Her eyes green, glassy with rain, and maybe tears met his with a confusion so raw it struck something deep inside him. "I don't know," she whispered, "where I'm supposed to go." Jack blinked. "You're not from around here." She shook her head slowly. Rain dripped from her chin. "No. I don't know where I came from." Jack's instincts kicked in. She was in shock. Maybe trauma. Maybe something worse. But this road was miles from town and she had no ID, no bag, nothing. "Okay," he said softly, taking off his raincoat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Come with me. You can warm up in the van, we'll figure out the rest." She hesitated for just a second before allowing him to guide her across the slick road. Ben stared from inside, eyes wide, as Jack opened the door. "This is—" Jack began. "Claire," she said, barely audible. "I think—" "I don't know." He nodded once. "Okay, Claire, this is Ben. He's my son. Don't worry, we'll get you somewhere safe." She gave a tiny nod before sinking into the passenger seat's soaked clothes clinging to her fragile frame. Jack turned the heat up and handed her a blanket from the back. Ben leaned forward, whispering, "Dad." "Is she hurt?" "I don't know, Bud," Jack murmured, pulling back onto the road. "But we're not leaving her out here." They drove in silence. Claire didn't speak again. She kept her eyes forward as if afraid to look back. Every now and then, Jack glanced over. Her hands clutched the blanket like it was a lifeline. Jack didn't take her to the hospital. He knew better. He'd seen that look before on victims too afraid to speak, too broken to ask for help. He'd seen it in burned-out shelters in the eyes of people who'd survived something they couldn't name. The hospital would mean forms, questions, maybe cops. And she wasn't ready. Instead, he drove her to the small house he and Ben shared just outside town. It wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, a home. He got Ben settled, then found Claire a change of clothes his late wife's packed away but never thrown out. Claire didn't ask. She only changed, sat on the couch, and wrapped her hands around the mug of tea he gave her like it was the first warmth she'd felt in months. "Do you want to talk?" Jack asked finally. She looked up, eyes flickering. "I don't remember where I was, just the sound of water, something breaking. Then, here, someone hurt you." A long pause. Then just, "I don't know." Jack nodded again, slow. He wouldn't press. He'd learned that silence, when held with kindness, could speak louder than questions. Later that night, when Ben had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Jack stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy humming with something unresolved. He watched the dark tree line beyond the fence. Something about tonight felt off. Not wrong, but unfinished. Inside, Claire sat staring at nothing, hands still wrapped around the cooling mug like she was bracing herself against a world only she could see. And in that moment, Jack knew whatever storm she'd come out of hadn't ended. It had just followed her home. The next morning brought a stillness so complete it almost felt unnatural. Jack stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes while the soft sizzle filled the room. Outside, the trees shimmered with leftover raindrops and sunlight filtered through the wide kitchen windows in muted gold. It was a new day, but the storm from last night hadn't really passed. Not for Claire. She sat at the edge of the worn couch, stiff and silent, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. Her hair, now clean and brushed, fell over her shoulders in waves, but her eyes remained distant, like she was still halfway between worlds. She had eaten half a banana and sipped at the tea Jack made, but that was all. Still, it was more than nothing. Jack glanced over. "Ben loves pancakes. Would you like some?" She didn't answer right away. Then quietly she asked, "Why are you helping me?" Jack flipped a pancake, took a breath. "Because you needed help." She looked at him as if trying to understand a language she hadn't heard in years. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he said, meeting her eyes. "You were freezing. Alone. Scared. That's all I needed to know." Claire's expression softened, but she quickly looked away. The lines in her forehead deepened. "I don't remember much. I thought I knew my name last night. But now I'm not sure. Claire. It sounds familiar, but it could be wrong." Jack gently placed a plate in front of her. "You can be Claire until you remember otherwise." Ben shuffled into the kitchen, hair a mess, dragging his sketchpad under one arm. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Then he stopped. "Hi again." Claire blinked. "Hi, Ben." "You look better," Ben said cheerfully, sliding into his usual chair. "Dad makes awesome pancakes." She smiled barely, but Jack caught it. A flicker of warmth amid the fog. As they ate, Jack watched the subtle way Claire responded to her surroundings. She jumped a little when the kettle whistled. She flinched when a siren wailed faintly from the highway. Her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for the fork. This wasn't just memory loss. It was trauma. Something had hurt her deeply and recently. Later that morning, after Ben left for school, Jack offered Claire his wife's old hoodie and took her for a walk around the yard. Not to push her, but to ground her. Sometimes being among trees and sun and clean air could do what no therapist could. He led her to the garden bed out back now, overrun with fall leaves. "I used to try growing vegetables here," he said, crouching to pull a weed. "Turns out I'm better at raising a kid than a tomato." That earned a faint chuckle. He glanced at her, encouraged. She looked around slowly. "It's peaceful here. Like the world forgot to rush." He smiled. That's the idea. They sat on the back steps. The silence wasn't awkward, it was comfortable. Trust didn't need to be fast, just real. Then Claire asked, "Did you lose someone too?" Jack nodded slowly. "My wife. Cancer. Ben was 5. I'm sorry," she said gently. "Thank you. It was a long road, but he's the reason I kept walking." Claire wrapped the hoodie tighter. "I think I had someone. Or I lost someone. Or maybe I ran from someone." Jack said nothing, just waited. She stared at the trees. There are flashes, sounds, water rushing, a door slamming. I see hands, hear a voice, but it's like trying to catch smoke. "Do you want to go to the police?" "No." The answer came fast, too fast. She took a breath. "Not yet. I don't even know what I'd tell them. That I forgot my own life." Jack hesitated, then said softly, "You don't have to figure everything out today." That evening, while Claire rested, Jack tucked Ben into bed. The boy looked up at him and whispered, "Is she going to stay?" Jack brushed his son's hair back. "I don't know, bud. She's figuring things out." Ben hugged his sketch pad. "She looks like someone who needs a home." Jack paused at the door. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "She does." He found Claire in the living room staring at the fireplace he hadn't lit in months. She didn't look up when he entered. "I'm not trying to be a burden," she said quietly. "You're not. I don't know how long I'll need to be here. As long as it takes." Her eyes welled. "You don't even know me." Jack sat on the other side of the room, leaving space. "I know who you are right now. And that's enough." There was a long silence. Then Claire whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." That night, as she slept on the couch, restless but safer than the night before, Jack stood in the hallway, arms crossed. He didn't know who Claire really was, what she was running from, what her past might reveal. But he knew this: she didn't need answers right now. She needed a place where the questions could wait. And maybe she'd found it here. By the third morning, Claire had begun to move through the house like a ghost who was slowly remembering how to be human. She rose early, helped Jack make breakfast without being asked, and quietly made the bed she slept on in the living room. She smiled more timidly, like someone trying on joy for the first time in years, but it was there. Even Ben noticed. "She's less floaty today," he whispered to Jack while tying his shoes. "Like she's starting to land." Jack chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. "That's a good thing, right?" Ben nodded. "Yeah, I think she's nice." So did Jack. There was a calmness about Claire, even in her brokenness. A kind of silent resilience that made people lean in instead of pull away. She still didn't remember much. Her memories were fragmented flashes that came and went like static, but she moved through the day with more steadiness. That morning, Jack even caught her humming while she folded laundry. It was only when Jack stepped into the garage that things shifted. He'd gone out to find an old toolbox for a leaky faucet when he noticed the stack of newspapers shoved behind a broken lamp on the shelf. They were from a few months back, untouched since spring, when he stopped subscribing after realizing bad news in the world didn't need his attention to exist. He picked one up absently, scanning headlines about state funding cuts and high school renovations, when a photo on the second page made his stomach tighten. It was her, not just someone who resembled her, Claire, or whoever she really was. The image was smaller than a credit card, but it showed her walking out of a courthouse chin, down hair, tied back eyes, hidden by sunglasses. The caption read, "Claire Devon. Famed architect disappears amidst embezzlement scandal. Last seen after being accused of mismanaging funds in the Willowbrook Community Project." Jack stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hands. Devon. That had to be her real name. He flipped through the article. It wasn't long, just a column and a half, most of it speculation. Words jumped out at him: brilliant but reclusive charity project under federal review, refused to comment, last seen near the Oregon coast. Claire Devon had vanished after a massive scandal, and now she was in his house washing dishes and teaching his son how to sketch trees. Jack folded the paper, carefully walked back into the house and placed it on the dining table without a word. Claire came in a few minutes later with a tray of eggs and toast. Her eyes dropped to the paper and froze. She stared, said nothing. Her hand trembled as she lowered the tray. Jack kept his voice low. "Is that you?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze locked onto the image like it might reach out and swallow her whole. Then in barely a whisper, "Yes." Jack leaned on the counter. Claire Devon. She sat slowly nodding once. "That was my name." He waited. Claire took a long breath. "I designed buildings, community centers, shelters. Then came the Willowbrook Project. It was everything to me. A children's library for underserved neighborhoods. We had backing volunteers, land donated by the county." She paused, voice cracking, and then the funding disappeared. Overnight, into someone else's hands. They said I moved it, lied, manipulated donors. But I didn't. I swear I didn't. Jack nodded, still watching her. "Why didn't you fight it?" "I did," she said barely above a whisper. "But the firm turned on me. My lawyer dropped me. The media made it look like I vanished in guilt. And then I did vanish." Jack's face softened. "Where did you go?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I left everything, my apartment, my phone. I drove until I didn't know where I was. The only thing I wanted was to forget I ever existed." There was silence for a long time. Claire finally looked up, bracing for judgment. But Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he quietly folded the newspaper closed, slid it off the table, and walked over to the trash bin. He dropped it in without a word. Claire's eyes filled. "Why did you do that?" Jack shrugged. "That's old news. You're here now. That's what matters." She stood, voice shaking. "You don't have to believe me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't." He looked her in the eye. "I don't know everything, but I know the woman who showed up in the rain didn't lie about needing help. That's enough for me right now." Claire's lip trembled. She sat back down hard in the chair and covered her mouth with both hands, trying to contain the sob that pushed its way out anyway. Jack didn't rush to console her. He just sat beside her close enough to show he wasn't leaving. That night, as she stood in the hallway looking at a photo of Jack and Ben framed in weathered wood, smiles, wide eyes bright, Claire whispered to herself, "Don't run this time." And for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to believe maybe kindness could still rebuild what the world tried to tear apart. It had been nearly a week since Claire came into their lives like a whisper on the edge of a storm. By now, her presence in the house felt familiar. Not permanent, not yet, but real in a way that no one questioned. Ben no longer asked if she would stay. He just assumed she would. Jack didn't say much about it either. But he cooked a little more, lingered longer in the mornings, and looked at her with an attentiveness that was hard to miss. And Claire was changing. Not in dramatic ways, but in the way she folded the laundry without needing to be asked. The way she stood a little straighter when Jack walked into the room. The way she gently placed her hand on Ben's back when he showed her a new drawing. She didn't remember everything, but she was remembering who she was. And then came Sunday afternoon. Jack was fixing the front porch railing, a task he'd put off for months, while Ben colored on the steps, and Claire for the first time sat with a sketch pad in her lap. She hadn't drawn anything since arriving, not even a line. But today, with the sun high and the breeze warm, something in her hands itched to move. She began lightly. A curve here, an outline there. Her fingers found the rhythm again. She was halfway through sketching the porch when Ben leaned over her shoulder and said, "That's really good. You should do that for a living." Claire froze. Ben blinked. "Did I say something wrong?" She shook her head, swallowing. "No. It's just, someone used to say that to me. A long time ago." Jack looked up from where he was hammering in a nail. Someone important. Claire hesitated. My grandmother. She raised me, believed in me before anyone else did. Jack nodded and went back to hammering. She sounds like someone worth listening to. Claire smiled faintly. She was. A few minutes later she stood and walked to the backyard. The trees rustled gently, casting dappled shadows across the grass. She stopped by the overgrown garden Jack had shown her days before. The soil was dry, the edges wild with weeds, but under the mess she saw structure, potential. She crouched, ran her fingers through the dirt, and closed her eyes. A flash hit her like lightning. A long table, children laughing, small painted hands pressing into paper, a man standing behind her, hands on her shoulders, heavy, possessive, his voice in her ear. "You're too soft, Claire. This isn't business, it's fantasy." She gasped and stumbled back. Jack appeared instantly. "Claire, you okay?" She pressed a hand to her chest. I remembered something." He waited, patient. She looked at him, her eyes dark. "There was a man. I don't remember his face, but he wasn't just a partner, he had power. Over me. Over the project. I think he made it look like I stole from it." Jack's jaw tightened. "You think he framed you?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But I didn't move that money. I know I didn't. I would never betray those kids." Jack looked toward the garden. "Then maybe it's time to reclaim something." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, motioning toward the patch of dirt, "this yard's got potential. You saw it. Maybe you could, I don't know, build something here." Claire looked down at her hands. "I used to design entire campuses, parks, libraries. I've been drawing again, but I don't know what I'm building for." Jack met her eyes. "Maybe you're building for you this time." The next morning, Claire was the first one up. Jack walked into the kitchen to find her at the table, pencil in hand, surrounded by scraps of paper. The coffee was already made. She didn't look up right away, too focused. When she finally did, her eyes were brighter than he'd seen. "I think I remember the design," she said breathlessly. "The one they buried. It was meant to be a community center. For kids who didn't have anywhere to go after school. A safe place. I remember the layout, the curves, the light. It came back to me like a dream." Jack smiled. "Good dream." She nodded. "The best kind. The kind you wake up wanting to make real." He sat across from her. "You going to draw it again? I already started." Jack watched her for a moment. Then, softly, "I never asked why you went into architecture." Claire paused. "I used to sit on the front steps of my grandmother's house and draw places I wished existed. Places where people could breathe. Places where no one felt small. I thought if I built them, maybe I could build something good inside myself, too." Jack didn't say anything. He just reached for his mug and took a long sip, letting the weight of her words settle. Later that day, she pinned the rough sketch to the fridge. Ben studied it for a long time. "Is that a real building?" "Not yet," Claire said gently. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Can we help you build it?" Claire smiled, deep and real. "I hope so, Ben." And for the first time since she arrived, Claire didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a blueprint coming back to life. A foundation being restored one quiet miracle at a time. The garden had become Claire's canvas. By the end of the second week, the backyard was no longer a forgotten patch of stubborn weeds and dry soil. Under Claire's hands, it had transformed into something alive, organized, intentional, almost hopeful. She started with small things. A row of lavender. 2 tomato plants Jack had nearly given up on. Wildflowers from a local nursery. Each addition seemed to breathe something new, not just into the yard, but into her. Jack would watch her from the kitchen window in the mornings, coffee in hand, as she worked quietly in the earth, hair tied back, sleeves, rolled eyes focused. She moved like someone who had lived through winter and finally trusted spring might return. "You know," he said one afternoon, stepping out onto the porch, "this is starting to look less like a hobby and more like a mission." Claire stood wiping her hands on her jeans. "Maybe it is." Jack smiled. "What's the plan?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just know it feels good to make something that grows." He nodded, folding his arms. "You ever think about starting over completely? Like new name, new place, new everything?" Claire considered it. "I used to. When I first got here, that's all I wanted, to disappear, erase everything. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe I want to face what I left. Just not yet." Jack's gaze softened. "Well, when you're ready, you won't be alone." Claire looked at him. Really looked. For a moment her defenses dropped and she allowed the quiet truth of that to reach her. "I know," she whispered. That evening, while Claire watered the flowers and Ben worked on a school project inside, Jack went into the garage to find a box of old supplies. He hadn't touched his late wife's art materials in years, charcoal pencils, brushes, paints she never got to finish. He'd kept them out of guilt and nostalgia, too afraid to give them away, too heartbroken to use them. He stared at the box a long time. Then, slowly, he carried it into the house. Claire was sitting at the dining table sketching a new layout, this time a communal greenhouse with benches for children and elderly residents. She looked up when she saw the box. "What's that?" Jack set it down. "Maggie's. My wife. She painted. Landscapes, mostly. I thought, maybe you'd want these." Claire touched the edge of the box like it might break beneath her fingers. "I don't want to take something that still belongs to her," she said softly. Jack met her gaze. "No, it belongs to what she believed in growth-healing color. If she were here, she'd be handing it to you herself." Claire blinked quickly. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped back, letting her open it when she was ready. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and the moonlight crept in through the windows, Claire opened the box alone. Inside were tubes of paint, still soft brushes wrapped in tissue, and a worn notebook filled with Maggie's half-finished watercolors and notes. Flipping through, Claire found a quote scribbled on one of the pages, "Beauty is the evidence of hope." Claire closed her eyes, let the words soak in. The next morning, something changed. She began painting again, small things at first. A sunrise on the back of a cereal box. The outline of Jack and Ben laughing together in pencil strokes. Flowers blooming along a picket fence. She taped the pictures to the fridge, not to impress anyone, but to say, "I'm here. I'm still creating." The town, too, began to take notice. It started with the neighbors. A retired couple brought over fresh eggs. A young teacher from the nearby school asked if Claire would volunteer to help with their struggling art program. Word spread. Not about Claire Devon, the architect caught in scandal, but about the quiet woman who brought life to a forgotten backyard and smiled like it took effort, but meant it when she did. Jack came home one afternoon with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "What's that?" Claire asked as she rinsed paintbrushes at the sink. "Permits," he said with a grin. "For the first phase of your greenhouse." I pulled a few strings with an old buddy at the zoning office. Her mouth dropped open. "You didn't." "I did. And get this, he remembers the Willowbrook plans. Said they were the best he'd ever seen. Asked if you'd ever consider reviving them." Claire didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled slightly as she dried them on a towel. Jack stepped closer. "You don't have to decide now. But I figured, if you're going to rebuild something, it might as well be bigger than a garden." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Jack, I don't know if I'm strong enough." He smiled gently. "That's okay. Just be brave enough to begin." That night, as Ben fell asleep with one of Claire's drawings tucked under his pillow and the garden outside rustled softly in the breeze, Claire stood at the kitchen window with Jack. "I thought healing would be dramatic," she said. "Loud, explosive." Jack took a sip of tea beside her. "Turns out it's more like planting seeds." She smiled. "Quiet miracles." "Exactly." And with that, something subtle but real settled between them. Not a declaration, not a promise, but the beginning of something that didn't need to be named to be true. Something was growing, and this time no one was going to take it away. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the ridge when Claire walked into the front yard and stopped cold. Parked at the curb was a dark sedan with tinted windows. At first glance, it looked like any other car that occasionally passed through their quiet neighborhood, but there was something about the way it sat engine off, but as if waiting, watching. Claire's heart thudded. She took a step back before Jack emerged from the garage, wiping his hands with a rag. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, not yet noticing the car. Claire hesitated. "Do you recognize that vehicle?" Jack followed her gaze. "No." "Why?" Before she could answer, the driver's side door opened. A tall man in a windbreaker stepped out, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp and deliberate. Not a cop, not a neighbor. Claire's stomach dropped. "Ms. Devon," the man called out, his voice smooth but firm. Jack instinctively moved closer to Claire. She swallowed. "Who's asking?" The man held up a badge, but it wasn't police. "Elliot Monroe, investigative journalist with The Current. I've been following the Willowbrook case since the beginning." Claire's entire body tensed. "I have nothing to say to the media. I'm not here for a quote," Monroe said. "I'm here because I think you were framed." Silence. Jack took another step forward. "She's not giving interviews. Not now. Not ever." Monroe held up his hands. "I get it. I do. But I've spent the last 6 months untangling financial records from the Willowbrook project. Do you know how many signatures on those transfer slips matched yours?" "Ms. Devon." Claire didn't answer. "0, Monroe said. "Not one. They were forged. And I can prove it." The words dropped like stones. Claire blinked, disoriented. "That's not possible. The investigation was closed. They buried everything." "They tried," Monroe replied, "but someone forgot about the project's subcontractor accounts. Sloppy bookkeeping left a trail. All I needed was time to find it." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Why now? Why show up here? Because I've been trying to track her down for weeks," Monroe said, glancing at Claire. "And when I saw a permit request go through under the name Jack Whitaker, an old firefighter with a shared address, I got curious." Claire folded her arms, voice tight. "So, you're here to—" "What?" "Clear my name with a headline." "I'm here," Monroe said carefully, "to give you a choice." He stepped forward, handed her a small folder. Inside were copies of transaction ledgers, court summaries, and a typed note, "Primary suspect Daniel Kane," with a photo clipped to the corner. Claire stared at the face. Her breath hitched. Daniel. Her former business partner. The man she once trusted with everything. The man who'd stood behind her at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, hand on her back like he owned her. "I never signed those forms," she whispered. "I know," Monroe said. "And if you're ready, we can show the world." Claire looked up, trembling. "But they already decided I was guilty. My name's Poison." Jack stepped in gently. "That can change." Claire glanced at him, then at Monroe. Her voice dropped. "If I do this, if I speak up now, it means everything becomes public again. I lose whatever peace I've found." Jack didn't say anything. He just looked at her with quiet strength, the same way he did the night he found her in the rain. Not pushing, just standing beside her. And that was enough. She took a slow breath. "Okay, I'll meet with you. But not here. Somewhere quiet." Monroe nodded. "You tell me when and where." He turned and walked back to the car. Before getting in, he paused. "You were never meant to vanish, Claire. You were meant to finish what you started." Then he drove off. Inside, Claire sat at the kitchen table, still holding the folder. Ben walked in from the living room holding his sketch pad. Who was that man? Jack gave Claire space to answer. "A reporter," she said carefully. "He's trying to help me fix something I didn't break." Ben looked at her, thoughtful. "Like when someone blames you for cheating, but you didn't." She smiled faintly. "Exactly like that." Ben sat beside her and opened his pad. "You can borrow one of my drawings if it helps people believe you." Jack smiled softly at the gesture. Claire reached out and brushed Ben's cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart. But your belief might be the only one I need." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She wandered the house in silence, passing framed photos of Jack and Maggie's school art projects on the fridge, the garden visible through the back window blooming in moonlight. This home had become a sanctuary, not just from the world, but from who she used to be. And now she was being asked to risk it all again for the truth. At some point, she sat in the armchair by the fireplace, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Jack joined her quietly, 2 mugs of tea in hand. She accepted one without a word. After a long pause, she said, "I'm scared." He nodded. "That's how you know it's worth doing." She looked at him. "What if everything falls apart again?" Jack met her gaze steady. "Then you build something stronger. And this time, you don't build it alone." Claire stared at him for a long moment, and slowly, hesitantly, she reached out her hand and placed it on his. No promises, no declarations, just quiet solidarity, and the strength to face what was coming. Together. The first stake was driven into the soil on a Tuesday morning. Claire stood in the middle of the backyard holding the sketch of the greenhouse close to her chest. Around her, a small but eager group of neighbors, retired teachers, a high schooler with green hair, a widowed carpenter watched as Jack hammered the first post into the ground. Ben, barefoot in the grass, lifted a small flag made of paper and tape. "Future sight of big plants and bigger dreams," it read. Claire laughed out loud, not a polite laugh, not a careful, quiet chuckle, a real, full-bodied laugh. Jack looked up smiling at the sound. "What's funny?" Claire wiped her eyes. "That name. It's perfect." Jack tilted his head. "You sure I thought you were going with the community garden project or something fancy?" She shook her head, beaming. "No, that one feels like something I used to build for grants." "This," she nodded at Ben. "This is for people." For weeks now, Claire had been quietly working behind the scenes to reclaim the Willowbrook plans, not to resurrect the name or clear her image, but to breathe life into the soul of what it had once meant. Monroe the journalist kept his distance but sent updates, daily copies of sworn statements, timestamps, ledgers, even a formal request from a nonprofit that wanted to review her original design. The truth was coming to light, but Claire wasn't waiting on redemption to move forward. She was already rebuilding, in soil and sketches and people. By noon, the garden had shape. Raised beds, chalk outlines for benches, a borrowed picnic table donated by a neighbor who couldn't kneel anymore but wanted to sit and supervise. Claire knelt to plant the first seedling sunflowers, and as her fingers pressed into the earth, she felt something shift. Not just in the yard, in herself. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. That evening, the porch was bathed in the warm amber of early summer light. Claire sat on the top step, sipping lemonade Jack had made, while Ben sprawled on a blanket nearby, reading a book and pausing occasionally to add to a sketch of the garden. "Do you think sunflowers really turn to follow the sun?" he asked suddenly. Claire smiled. "Yes, they do." Ben looked skeptical. "Is that real, or like a nice story?" Grown-ups made up, Jack joined them with a grin. "Sometimes the nice stories are the real ones." Claire turned to Ben. Plants bend toward the light. Even in dark soil, even when they've been buried, they reach for warmth. It's not a trick, it's how they survive. Ben squinted at his drawing. "So, if someone's been buried in a lot of dirt, they can still grow." Her voice caught in her throat, but she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. They can grow into something beautiful." Jack glanced at her, the silence between them, weighted and warm. "I met with the art teacher today," Claire said, changing the subject gently. "She wants me to help design an outdoor classroom on the school grounds." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's big. It's something Claire said. I told her I'd do it, if the students helped with the design." "You're really doing it," he said, voice soft. "Starting over." Claire looked at him. "I'm not starting over, Jack. I'm just continuing on my own terms this time." He nodded, thoughtful. "That's even better." As the sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, neighbors started dropping by. One brought lemonade, another homemade bread. A young couple who'd just moved in brought their toddler and asked if the future garden would have space for children to play. Claire told them yes, without hesitation. Jack watched as she moved from one conversation to the next like someone born for this work, someone who had always belonged to a community but had been waiting for the right one to appear. It was Ben who said it first. "I think the garden's magic." Claire turned to him amused. "Magic, huh?" "Yeah," he said, "not like wands and dragons, but like people being kind, that kind of magic." Jack leaned back on the railing and said quietly, "The rarest kind." As night fell, the small group lingered under strings of warm lights Jack had hung from the trees. Claire pulled a folded paper from her pocket and taped it to the side of the house. In handwritten script it read, "You're welcome to plant here whatever you've got. Seeds, stories, second chances." Everyone paused when they saw it, and smiled. Claire stepped back, breathing in the night air. Her face glowed in the soft light and her eyes shimmered with something Jack hadn't seen before. Not just healing. Hope. Later, when the crowd had gone and Ben was asleep, Jack found Claire in the garden again, standing barefoot in the soil. "You're not tired of dirt yet?" he asked. She smiled, not even close. He stepped beside her. They stood together in silence, shoulder to shoulder. Then Claire spoke. "You know what's strange? What I was never afraid of building things," she said. "I was afraid of losing them." Jack looked at her gently. "But you kept building anyway." Claire nodded. "And I think maybe that's what makes us brave." Jack didn't speak, but he reached down and took her hand. And in that small, quiet gesture, no headlines, no speeches, no grand proclamations. Claire Devon, once disgraced, once disappeared, stood firmly rooted in the present, still growing, still choosing the light. The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it was sharp, precise, like a punctuation mark to a sentence no one had written yet. Claire glanced up from the stack of children's artwork she'd been organizing for the school's new art wall. Jack, beside her, went still. The light in the kitchen was golden, peaceful. The smell of fresh bread still lingered in the air. But the moment that knock landed, something shifted. Ben looked up from his cereal. "Are we expecting anyone?" Jack shook his head. Claire's breath caught. She didn't know why, but she knew. Jack opened the door. Daniel Kane stood on the porch, immaculate as ever, suit tailored, smile sharp, hands in his pockets like this was some casual reunion. Claire froze. Claire Daniel said, as though her name was something he still owned. "It's been a while." Jack's posture changed. Subtle. Protective. He stepped half in front of Claire before she could rise. "You're not welcome here," he said flatly. Daniel didn't even flinch. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk." Claire stood slowly. Her knees felt made of paper, but she met his gaze. "You shouldn't have come." "I heard you've been busy," Daniel said, eyes sweeping the house, the warm interior behind Jack's shoulder. "Greenhouses, art programs, reporters sniffing around." "Honestly, I'm impressed." Jack's voice dropped. "Say what you came to say." Daniel tilted his head eyes back on Claire. "You're playing with fire, reopening the past like this. You think people are going to care about old ledgers and sympathy stories? They'll remember one thing: your name tied to scandal." Claire's fingers tightened around the back of the chair. "So that's it. You came to warn me." "No," Daniel said, stepping forward. "I came to offer you a way out. Walk away from all of this. Don't give Monroe anything more. Don't testify. And I'll make sure no one dredges up uncomfortable details." Claire's voice was flat. "What details?" Daniel smiled. "The fact that you knew about the transfers, that you didn't stop them, that you were complicit, even if not criminal. You're not squeaky clean, Claire. No one is. We both know that. You forged my signature." He shrugged. "That's hard to prove." Jack's jaw flexed. "You need to leave." Daniel gave him a slow, dismissive look. "You're the boyfriend. I take it." the fixer-upper she latched onto once her world burned down. Jack didn't move. Claire stepped forward then. Calm, quiet, but every word clear. "This isn't your world anymore, Daniel. You don't get to define what matters." Daniel's smile flickered. "Just for a second. You want the truth out there?" she continued. "Fine. Let it out, all of it. I'll take the bruises if it means others see what you did." Daniel's tone hardened. "You won't win." Claire held his gaze. "I already have. I'm not afraid of you anymore." Silence. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You'd ruin everything for pride." Claire shook her head. "For integrity. For the kids that Center was meant for. For the people who believed in something better." Daniel stared at her for a beat longer. Then he turned on his heel and walked back to his car without another word. When the sound of the engine faded, Jack closed the door and turned to Claire. Her hands were shaking. Jack stepped closer. "You okay?" She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was the man I thought would help me change the world." Jack reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Turns out you didn't need him." She smiled weakly. "I used to think I needed someone to open doors for me. But maybe I just needed to stop standing in my own way." Ben peeked into the kitchen. Was that the bad guy? Claire knelt and opened her arms. "Something like that." Ben ran into her hug. That night, Claire sat in the garden long after the stars came out. The breeze was cool. The earth still held warmth from the day. She stared at the seedlings' tiny green things that had no idea someone once doubted they'd survive. Jack joined her in silence. He didn't need to ask what she was thinking. Claire spoke without turning. "I used to believe that people were either good or bad. But it's not that clean. People make choices, and sometimes they choose selfishness." He nodded. "And sometimes they choose kindness." Claire looked at him then. "Thank you for letting me find the difference." Jack smiled. "You didn't need me for that." "No," she said softly, "but you reminded me what it looked like." The porch light cast a soft glow over them. Somewhere in the house a wind chime rang gently. Claire looked at the night sky and whispered, "Tomorrow I give Monroe the final files. The original drafts, the timestamps, the sketch with the forged signature overlay. It'll be public." Jack didn't flinch. "You're sure I'm sure," she said. "It's not about clearing my name anymore. It's about clearing the ground so something better can grow." Jack nodded slowly. "Then whatever happens, we're with you." She turned, eyes shining. "We, Ben and me," he said. "This house, this garden, this life we're building. It's all part of your story now." Claire reached for his hand. "Then I'm not afraid." And for the first time since her world fell apart, she meant every word. The meeting room at the town library wasn't grand, just 4 beige walls, a dusty projector screen, and a long oak table that smelled faintly of lemon polish. But to Claire, it felt like a courtroom, a battlefield, a place where truths were either laid bare or buried deeper. Elliot Monroe was already there, laptop open, stacks of documents neatly arranged. He looked up as she walked in with Jack beside her and gave a respectful nod. "You sure about this?" he asked. Claire set her bag down and took a slow breath. "I've been sure since I let him scare me at the door. That ends today." Jack squeezed her hand once before stepping back, giving her space. Claire opened her folder and laid out everything: the original architectural plans for Willowbrook with metadata timestamps, photocopies of her design notes, emails that had been recovered from an old hard drive, and the centerpiece 2 overlays, her real signature and the forged one on the financial authorizations. Monroe examined them carefully, saying nothing for several minutes. Then he closed the folder and looked up. "This is it. This is what clears the path." Claire didn't ask what that meant for headlines or social media firestorms. She didn't care. For her, this wasn't a press opportunity, it was a release. A quiet one. "Daniel won't go down easy," she said. "No," Monroe replied, But he'll go down eventually. He left too much in the dark and the light's coming in now. Claire looked out the window where sunlight poured in through glass streaked with last night's rain. Back at the house, Ben was drawing on the back porch, lost in a world of color. Claire sat beside him while Jack prepped dinner inside. A pot of something warm simmered on the stove. "Did the meeting go okay?" Ben asked. Claire smiled. "It did. I think we finally planted the last piece of the truth." Ben colored a sunflower with bright orange petals. "Will the police come now?" Claire chuckled gently. "Maybe, but that part's not up to me anymore." Ben paused. "Does that mean you're not in trouble?" Claire's throat tightened. She placed a hand over his. "I never should have been." He nodded, wise beyond his years. "Good. I didn't think someone who makes gardens could be bad." Claire looked at him, eyes glistening. "You're a good judge of character." Ben beamed. Inside, Jack set the table, his movements unhurried. This house didn't feel like a stop along the way anymore. It felt like a destination. A place where stories didn't have to end in pain. Where people could choose healing, even if the scars never fully disappeared. That night, after dinner and stories and quiet music playing from the old speaker Jack insisted was vintage, not outdated, Claire sat with her laptop at the dining table. Not searching the news, not checking comments, just finalizing her updated design for the community center, a version that had nothing to do with reputation, prestige, or redemption. It was for the kids. For the single mom who'd asked her yesterday if there would be a literacy room. For the elderly veteran who wanted to host woodworking classes. For the lonely teenager who'd walked by the garden 3 times before finally asking if they could help water the basil. Claire was no longer building to prove anything. She was building because people needed spaces where they mattered. A week later, the article went live. Claire Devon wasn't guilty. She was right. It opened with her garden, with Ben's sunflower sign, with photos Monroe had taken her sketchbook, her original blueprints, a quote from Jack about watching something grow that had once been broken. The reaction was swift. Support. Apologies. Even a quiet statement from Daniel Kane's office that reeked of legal panic. But Claire didn't read the comments. She closed the laptop after the second paragraph, walked outside, and planted a new row of seeds. Carrots this time. Jack joined her a few minutes later, kneeling beside her in the dirt. "You didn't want to finish it. I already know how it ends," Claire said. The truth came out. "That's enough." Jack smiled. "And what's next?" Claire wiped her hands. "We break ground on the school's outdoor classroom next month. Then maybe. We expand the garden. Make it something bigger. Community run. Maybe even," Jack leaned closer, "a legacy." Claire looked up, startled. "That's a big word. It fits," Jack said simply. She paused, then nodded. "Not just mine, though. Yours. Ben's. Everyone's who believed something good could still come from something hard." Jack brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "You know what I see when I look at you now?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "A woman covered in soil." He chuckled. "I see someone who chose to stay, who stopped running, who started sewing instead of hiding." Claire didn't answer right away, but then she leaned forward and kissed him. Softly, slowly, with all the gratitude, strength, and unspoken tenderness that had been building since the night he found her in the rain. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. When they pulled apart, Claire whispered, "I think I finally know where I'm supposed to be." Jack grinned. "Took you long enough." They laughed quietly under the stars. No applause. No camera flashes. Just hands held, hearts open, and the deep, steady rhythm of something blooming. And just beyond the porch, the sunflower Ben had planted first now stood taller than both of them, always turning toward the light. It had rained the night before, one of those soft, soaking spring showers that seemed to cleanse more than just the ground. The air was rich with the smell of earth and new life, and the sun rose, slowly stretching warm fingers through dew-laced leaves and garden beds humming with green. Claire stood on the path leading to the greenhouse frame, a clipboard in one hand and her heart doing an uneven dance in her chest. Today wasn't a grand opening or a press event. There were no microphones or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. It was just the first day of something real. Behind her, the school bus squeaked to a stop at the corner. A dozen children stepped off, chattering and bouncing. Among them were 3 kids from the community shelter, 2 whose parents worked night shifts, and 1 quiet girl. Claire recognized from the art class she'd started volunteering in Lena, who hadn't spoken a full sentence until last week. Ben ran ahead to greet them like the unofficial mayor of the garden. "Come on. Claire says we get to name the flower beds." Claire smiled as the group spilled through the gate like sunshine full of voices, movement, possibility. She caught Jack's eye from across the lawn. He was adjusting one of the bench's sleeves, rolled sawdust in his hair. When he saw her watching, he gave her a lopsided grin and a thumbs up. She returned it, trying to stay composed, but the lump in her throat told her she was failing. This was the dream, one she hadn't dared name out loud when it began. Not when she first arrived broken, not when she was still unsure if she'd even earned the right to hope again. But somehow, through patience, love, and the quiet resilience of soil and seasons, the dream had rooted. And now it was blooming. Claire knelt beside a group of children helping plant herbs. "What should we call this row?" A boy with paint-stained fingers said, "Pizza garden, pizza garden," she laughed. "Yeah, basil, oregano, tomatoes. Everything you need." She nodded solemnly. "Approved. Pizza garden, it is." Lena tugged gently at Claire's sleeve and pointed to a small wooden signpost. "Would you like to name one, too?" Claire asked. Lena bit her lip, then whispered, "Hope." Claire paused. "Hope?" The girl nodded. "Because I didn't think I'd ever like being outside again." Claire's eyes stung. She squeezed the girl's hand. "Hope it is." Later that afternoon, as the kids gathered in a semicircle for story time under the shade structure, Claire walked back to the porch for a break. Jack was already there, handing her a glass of lemonade. "I've never seen you this quiet," he said, sitting beside her. She chuckled. "I don't think I have room left in my chest. It's full." Of. She looked out at the garden, the kids, the signs, the colors, the life. Gratitude, peace, something that feels a lot like home. Jack nodded. "You earned every inch of this." She turned to him, serious now. "I didn't do it alone." "No," he said. "But you were brave enough to begin." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long while, 2 people not chasing anything, just being. It was a stillness, hard-won and well-kept. As twilight began to settle, the last of the children were picked up. Lena was the last to leave, waving goodbye with dirt still under her nails. Claire waved back, heart full. She walked to the garden one last time, making her rounds. She stopped in front of the oldest sunflower, the one Ben had planted when the ground was still hard and the future unsure. It had grown taller than the fence now, its golden head bowed slightly as if nodding in quiet approval. Ben joined her, standing beside her, barefoot in the soil. "It looks happy." "It does," she agreed. He glanced up at her. "You look happy, too." Claire knelt beside him. "I am. Are you going to stay here forever?" She paused. "You know what I think I just might." He grinned. "Good." Jack appeared a few minutes later with a flashlight. "Sun's down, gardeners. Time to go in." But Claire didn't move right away. She looked out at what they had built, not just the garden, but the moments inside it. The soft reopening of her heart. The laughter she thought she'd lost. The rhythm of belonging she didn't realize she'd craved. It wasn't a grand monument. It wouldn't make headlines or earn accolades. But it mattered. And that was enough. That night after dinner, Jack found Claire in the old garage digging through her sketchbooks. "What are you doing?" he asked. She held one up, the cover frayed. Inside was a plan she had drawn years ago before everything had fallen apart. A community center. Reading nooks, art rooms, a kitchen for teaching, wide-open windows, soft seating, laughter drawn into every curve. I thought maybe, she said slowly, it was time to start dreaming again. Jack smiled and picked up a pencil. Mind if I help? She looked at him, then at the old plan, and for the first time in a long time she whispered, "Yes, please." Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees, and in the quiet corner of the garden under starlight and promise the seeds they'd planted began to stir beneath the surface, ready for their own miracle. 1 year later, the town was different. Not bigger, not wealthier, just more awake. It showed in the way people paused longer at the community board outside the post office reading flyers about free garden classes and shared potlucks. It showed in the new bench outside the pharmacy built by high school volunteers where strangers now sat and talked like old friends. It showed in the way laughter rose full and unself-conscious from the wide lawn behind the library where there once was nothing but patchy grass and silence. Claire stood at the edge of it, all heart steady. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers fresh picked from the garden she once thought would be temporary, and watched as children tumbled through a chalk-drawn hopscotch path. Parents mingled near picnic tables, and local musicians tuned their instruments beneath a canopy of string lights. Today was the dedication. The center they had imagined heard Jack Ben, the neighbors, the school kids, the woman. From the shelter who now ran the kitchen garden was finally open. Not just the greenhouse, but the entire space. Classrooms repurposed from an old municipal building. An open studio filled with donated art supplies. Shelves of books and journals. A shared kitchen warm with the smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee. They named it the Corner of Quiet Miracles. Claire didn't choose the name. Ben did. When asked why, he simply said, "Because that's what it became." Now, standing in the soft afternoon light, Claire could feel that truth in every cell of her body. She'd been broken once, lost, misunderstood. She had arrived here not to be found, but to disappear. And yet, instead of vanishing, she had grown roots. Not despite what she'd endured, but because of it. Jack came up beside her wearing the same navy shirt he'd worn the day he planted the first stake in the garden. "You good?" he asked. She turned to him. "I'm better than good." He took her hand. "They're ready for you." Claire stepped onto the small platform at the front of the garden, where a modest microphone stood waiting. The crowd, quieted, casual, and kind, a mix of familiar faces and new ones drawn by word of mouth and something harder to name, something they all seemed to recognize when they arrived. She cleared her throat. The wind rustled the trees. She could smell basil and fresh paint. "I don't have a long speech," she began, smiling. "Just a story." A few parents chuckled softly. "Once I believed I needed a fresh start to erase the past. But it turns out," she paused, voice warming, "you don't need to erase anything. You just need to build something strong enough to carry it." She glanced toward Jack, then Ben, who waved wildly and gave her 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. "I came to this town with nothing. No plan, no name I trusted. Just a heart that still wanted to be useful. And what I found, what you gave me, was space, time, and a lot of kindness." Her voice caught for just a moment. This place wasn't built by one person. It was built by every hand that pulled a weed, painted a wall, baked a casserole, or told a tired woman she mattered when she'd forgotten how to believe it. She stepped back from the mic, and the applause that followed wasn't loud, it was real. Claire didn't bow. She didn't wave. She just walked back into the crowd, letting herself be part of it again, not the center, just one note in the harmony. Later, when the sun began to set and the lights twinkled like stars made just for this garden, Jack pulled her aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. She raised an eyebrow. "Is it a tomato?" "Because I still don't trust the ones we grew near the compost pile." He laughed. "No. Better." He handed her a folded sheet of paper. She opened it slowly. It was a deed. Her name in clean official font was now listed as co-director and legal steward of the community property. Half of the space belonged to her. She looked up, stunned. "Jack, you were already its heart," he said gently. This just makes it official. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. I don't know what to say. Say you're staying. She stepped into his arms, the paper crinkling between them. I'm staying. Ben ran up to them holding a paper flower he'd made in one of the afternoon workshops. Mom, can we hang this on the library window? Claire froze, not at the word, but at how natural it felt. Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable. Ben noticed. Was that weird? Claire knelt. No, sweetheart. That was perfect. Ben nodded, satisfied, and ran ahead. Claire stood slowly, heart full. He's never called anyone that before. Jack smiled. He knows what's real. She took a deep breath, the kind that settles into your lungs like a promise. So do I. That night, after everyone had gone home and the garden was lit only by moonlight and memory, Claire stood at the center of it all. She reached down and pressed her fingers into the soil one last time. Not to plant, not to pull, just to feel. And in that silence, still and sacred, she whispered not a prayer, but a quiet truth. You don't have to bloom in the place where you were planted. You can bloom where you were broken and make it beautiful. Behind her, Jack waited. Beside him, Ben. And around them a world quietly mending one small miracle at a time. Sometimes we wait for the world to change. But maybe all it takes is one person stopping in the rain. One seed planted in broken ground. One quiet miracle whispered in the dark. If this story touched your heart, tell us, have you ever experienced a small kindness that changed everything? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you believe the world still needs stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay with us for more journeys that heal, inspire, and remind us of the good that still exists. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep planting kindness. You never know what might grow.